Thank you. What a wonderful introduction. We're running a bit late, so I'm going to move right along and begin by saying that this is an interesting moment. 2 days ago, we said goodbye to the Indonesian delegation that's going to St. Petersburg, where there's a nomination to turn parts of Bali into a World Heritage. And I've spent, as you've just learned, some years working on trying to make that system visible, a system of water temples. So originally, the problem was convincing economists, engineers, the World Bank, that there was a functional significance to the way things happen in Bali. But we now sort of have to scale up because the opportunity with the World Heritage proposal is to tell that story to the world. So this is sort of a first draft of an attempt to begin to do that, and I invite and ask for your assistance. So off we go to the island of Bali. Right, there we go. Except first we'll go to Angkor Wat. Story actually begins there, where several archaeologists learned recently that much of Angkor was invisible. It turns out that Angkor Wat was the largest pre-modern, so to say, city ever, but it was not recognized as such until the work of Damien Evans and Roland Fletcher and some other people. Anyway, there it is, this enormous thing, certainly the most intriguing for an archaeologist system of irrigation anybody ever created. And up in the headwaters of the main river that irrigates the Angkorian system, there we are. There are several hundred sacred objects. It's called the Valley of the Linga. And in the center of these, so as the water flows over those stones, it's purified, okay? And this was created at just about the beginning of the Angkorian period. They saw to it that the water that would come down and irrigate that world would be sanctified. And you'll see here in the center, the central image is the god Vishnu, who's meditating at the end of the third age of the world, which ended in fire, for 1,000 years as to whether he would restart the world. Shall we give it another try? So at the end of 1,000 years, he decided, what the hell, or words to that effect in Sanskrit, and you will see there is Brahma emerging from a lotus. It's the beginning of our age. That's the beginning of the fourth world. But Angkor, we sent actually our team of Balinese who are working on the World Heritage Project went to Angkor to have a look, and they found it very sad because although the waters are still sanctified, Angkor is now what UNESCO calls a dead monument, right? This week, UNESCO will decide on whether Bali will have a World Heritage Site for the water temples in the Subaks, which I'll explain to you in a minute. So like Angkor Wat, it contains beautiful archaeological sites, although rather smaller ones than Angkor. Come on, click. But it's still alive in Bali, right? It's still very much alive. So the goal of this World Heritage Project is to keep it alive by making it visible. The problem all along has been that the way in which this worked was simply invisible to well-meaning, but well-meaning foreign engineers, consultants, agronomists, all kinds of people simply fail to recognize what it is. So that's what I'm going to try to make clear to you. This talk is thus part of that project. It's like a first try, okay? So the question is, what are they trying to save? Why are the Balinese so keen? Well, it is a landscape that's been engineered by the farmers and managed by networks of Pura Subak, or water temples we can call them. I'm having trouble with the clicker. Or at least it was until recently. 1970s, the Green Revolution began with well-intentioned attempts to boost the rice production on Bali and elsewhere in Indonesia, and that necessarily was a top-down project, launched, again, I have to emphasize, by people with absolutely the best of intentions. It just turns out that the world's complicated. So here's the story. All right, 6. The Green Revolution had just begun. The Green Revolution means the introduction of Western farming techniques, basically. It's high-yielding plants that are designed to grow quickly, along with chemical fertilizers and pesticides. So this came as a package to the Balinese farmers. The farmers were told, in the interests of national development, take this new rice and plant just as fast as you can. If you can get 3 crops a year, great. Some of the old people said, well, the trouble with that is, according to our traditional system, we schedule, we carefully time when the water goes into the fields and when it doesn't, and there are reasons for that.
After a couple of years of bumper harvests, those reasons started to become clear. Stephen Lansing's old friend, Wayan Pege, is a farmer in Sebatu. He remembers what it was like 20 years ago when the pests began to appear.
Waktu sekitar tahun 80-an tuh dah diulang lagi.
The Green Revolution remedy for pests was pesticides. It's not just that the farmers were advised to use pesticides, they were forced to use pesticides. They would be punished by the government if they didn't, because the government would say if anybody doesn't use pesticides immediately, as soon as any sign of pests appear, then the pest will spread to other fields. So within a year or two, even the farmers, pumping these pesticides into their fields couldn't kill all the pests. The government then began to fly the island, dropping pesticides from airplanes, and they succeeded in killing damn near everything.
Itu kepercayaan tetap kepada fungsinya kepada Sang Pencipta, karena segala yang hidup itu ditentukan oleh Sang Pencipta.
He says that everything is made by a creator, and so by disturbing anything, by killing anything, you're disturbing part of the creation. So you need to pay attention to the whole picture. Essentially saying you have to pay attention to the whole picture.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that, Stephen told me, was the role of the water temple. Looking at the whole picture, applying wisdom accumulated over centuries.
In the middle courtyard of the temple, the farmers gather every month. They make decisions in a democratic assembly on how they're going to plant. So here's how it works. That's our village, that's our subak. We share the water that comes from that weir with those guys, and we coordinate with the people upstream. And we do that by going up and making offerings at that temple. So the hydrological system is mirrored by a system of water temples. It's just that simple. But networks like that can have emergent properties. So we've talked about complexity. John Holland in 1975, I think, is the one who defined it first. So complex adaptive system, a network of interacting agents who are trying to maximize something. Turns out that sometimes the network that emerges can have properties that you can understand without bothering what's going on at the lower levels. So I'm going to convince you that that's what you're looking at. Okay, so here we have, begins with ecology. Rice paddies are artificial ponds. It's the fertility of the pond aquaculture that makes the rice grow. So the control of water is how the thing works. Turns out that Balinese volcanics are rich in potassium and phosphate, which is fortunate for the farmers. So if you look at the phosphate flowing down into the irrigation water, here you probably can't see it too well, but that's the water coming in at the beginning of the planting system. And after they planted the rice, look, the phosphate's being used by the rice plant. So it's a perfect little hydroponic delivery system for the farmers. They're very fortunate in their volcano, okay? Perhaps even more than the Icelanders. However, it's not a perfect story because as the monsoon rains fall on that steep volcanic landscape and pick up these minute, sharp pieces of volcanic pumice, they develop a cutting edge. So they slice the rivers down like this into the channels of ravines. If you're a farmer, the problem is, how do you get the water from down there to where you can use it to grow rice? 896 AD, there is an inscription that refers to irrigation tunnel builders. There are still traditional irrigation tunnel builders in Bali. If you work hard enough for a couple of years, then you can build tunnels that go through solid rock for several hundred meters and create a system like that. All of the farmers who obtain water from the same irrigation channel form a subak. They create a temple where they give thanks to the powers that make the rice grow there. And when they have meetings in those water temples, they set aside the rules of caste and the Balinese language, which insists you can't speak Balinese without indicating the relative caste status of the person you're talking to. It's worse than an academic department. But you have to set that aside during the subaks. The subaks begin in the 12th century, so it's one of the few functioning ancient democratic institutions that we know about. It's kind of beautiful. Up in the center of the main volcanic lake, there is, it's thought to be the home of a goddess, the goddess of waters. Water temple priests from around the lake collect holy water, which is considered to be the blessing of the goddess. So the water belongs to the goddess, and if you grow things with her water, it would behoove you to make an offering to her, to acknowledge your thanks. This is how it works.
The Balinese call their religion Agama Tirtha, the religion of water. Each village temple controls the water that flows into nearby rice terraces.
So that's one subak.
Regional water temples control the flow into larger areas.
10 subaks.
High up on the volcano Mount Batur, there is an enormous crater lake. The Balinese believe the lake is the home of the goddess of the waters, Dewi Danu, who makes the waters flow into the rivers and irrigation canals. The supreme water temple of Bali sits on the rim of the crater overlooking the lake. Once a year, priests give holy water from the lake to the farmers as a blessing from the goddess. First, priests ascend the crater to collect drops of water from the steam of the active volcano.
Zenith of a mandala.
Then the priests prepare the holy water for the farmers. A temple scribe writes letters on palm leaves inviting farmers to the temple. Delegations from over 200 villages journey up the mountain to bring offerings to the goddess. At the Supreme Water Temple, the gamelan orchestra plays in honor of the goddess and the worshippers. Temple priests give a sujung, a bamboo container filled with holy water, to each village delegate. The delegations then carry the holy water to their regional temples.
Heads of 10 subaks. That's a regional water
Here,
temple.
the water from the goddess is mixed with more holy water, adding the blessings of local gods and goddesses. Each delegate receives a sujung of this water to take back to his village. At the village temples, local farmers receive a blessing for themselves and their fields. A few drops of holy water are sprinkled on every field. This ritual symbolizes the sharing of water that forms a coordinated system of irrigation in Bali. Working together in this way, the Balinese have maintained the ecology of their rice terraces for over 1,000 years.
That's the system. But they can also use it to control rice pests. It's quite simple. Lots of other things besides people like to eat rice. But by synchronizing the harvest over a sufficiently large area, you remove the habitat, the food for the pests, and the pests have nothing to eat. Their populations will decline. Not all gone, but they will decline. However, it means everybody has to plant at the same time on a fixed schedule. Otherwise, the pests can migrate, and you need to pay attention to which pests you're dealing with so that you get the size of that fallowing period right. That's what the water temples do. Here's how we think it works. Simplified, simple question we ask the farmers, which is worse? Water shortages or pest damage? If you're the upstream farmer, if you synchronize and you allow the downstream guy to get a little of your water, right? You give up that water, but then you both harvest at the same time, pests are under control. Alternatively, if you're the upstream farmer, you have the option of keeping as much water as you like, but my pests from downstream may come up and eat your rice. So we asked 150 farmers in 10 subaks, which is worse. You can't see the picture, but what it shows is perfectly, the upstream farmers indeed worry about pests. They don't have to worry about water. The downstream guys worry about water. So that worked. However, it doesn't really explain things because we've got dozens and dozens of these subaks connected with each other, water and pests going in all different directions. So how does it actually work? How do they get it right at the scale of whole watersheds? Here's a map of 2 rivers, 172 little irrigation subaks, obviously not to scale. Simulation model starts with everybody choosing a cropping schedule. Then we simulate the rain flows, goes into the canals, the rice grows, the pests move around. We calculate the harvest yield and test it and discover, lo and behold, the water temples get the right scale of coordination to optimize harvest yields. So when I gave that talk at the Santa Fe Institute for the first time, a guy named Walter Fontana, a physical chemist, said, "That's very interesting." This is when my talk ended in those days. He said, "That's very interesting, Steve, but you've just told us they had 1,000 years to figure this out, so maybe it's not surprising they got it right. Tell me, did someone have to invent and engineer this system, or could it self-organize?" which seemed like a good question. So we built a hill climbing model, and I learned what self-organization means. Same model, only in this case, we start with random cropping patterns for every subak. So maybe the star means plant in January and August, and the triangle means something else, just a random schedule, right, for the year. And we simulate a year. Then at the end of the year, everybody checks to see who got the most rice, who got the best harvest, me or one of my 4 neighbors around me. If any of the neighbors did better, I copy what they did. Otherwise, I stick with my plan, and we iterate, okay? So that's all there is to it, like 10 lines of code. Here's year 1, random cropping patterns, less than 5 tons of rice per hectare. That's not good. By year 10, these blocks of synchronized harvests have appeared. See that? And the rice yields have nearly doubled. And finally, there's the actual water temple system, global optimum. It works. It works. As a matter of fact, no matter what the biology is, we can change the pest virulence or the water. As long as you allow them to have this learning process, it will always grow a water temple network, and it will always approach a global optimum. Everybody does well, so it means there's no reason to be jealous, which otherwise could be a factor, because everybody does equally well. Good news for the farmers. Going water temple networks always succeeds, but I don't think I have time to explain. Well, I'll say very quickly. If you check with 3 neighbors, some of you find a solution, but some don't. This is the years going by. This is how many subaks change their cropping pattern. If we go to checking with 4 neighbors, a few more get it within a few years. If we get to 13, check with 13 neighbors and see who did better, nearly everybody finds the solution, and they find it faster. If, on the other hand, we say, well, just check anywhere in the system, it's a recipe for chaos. Information doesn't get there, right? It really is a simple little complex adaptive system. So temple networks will always grow. Right, so in my remaining 3 minutes, having given you a functional explanation for water temple networks, why then is most of the business of subaks about ritual? Why bother with ritual? Okay. Balinese cosmology is dualistic. Inner world of the self, outer world of the universe. The two are composed of the same things. Male and female. The rituals of the subaks have to do with female powers of transformation and growth. And I think I can't show you this clip, so I'll just tell you that in the end what it means is, since everything in the inner world is also in the outer world, krodha means anger, and it lives here in me, and if you only knew it, it lives in the same place in you, okay? All those things are thought to be the same. Those are the elements of the inner world. They're composed of the same things, but we can get them out of whack. We can become disaligned. We can become too angry. The purpose of the rituals is to align those elements of the inner world, the self. So every year, people make offerings. If you visit Bali, you'll see many offerings all the time. Colors, sounds, music. They are also emotions. They're also the components of the outer world. And by aligning those things together, we kind of concentrate on what it takes to maintain a world in which these water temples will succeed. So the offerings depict them in perfect order. They relate simultaneously to the inner world and to the outer world, like this. And with greater complexity comes more perfect order, okay? So that's how they look. Here's the most complex water temple offering of them all, but there are much simpler ones like that. When a Balinese is born, these elements are aligned. When they die, here are the elements decomposing from a farmer's body on the burial shroud, here from the body of a high priest, a Bedanda high priest who spent the last half of his life trying to increase his powers of concentration over himself. So it's just depicted in the world. This is how the world works. This is how you work. Okay, so that was the idea. That's what the rituals are about. I've got a minute. So the control of the self is how you maintain rice paddies. If people don't cooperate, then what looks like a beautiful jeweled, beveled landscape of water temple, of terraces, turns into a muddy hillside. Requires continuous cooperation. We have inscriptions from subaks from the 12th century. They're still in business. So they maintain this. Sometimes they fail, but they're able to maintain it. Okay, so 1970s, the top-down green revolution began in Bali. Everybody plants as often as possible with no coordination, so as to boost rice production. But in effect, what they're doing is you can duplicate this with our simulation model by running it in reverse, taking the system of globally optimal patterns created by the water temples and backing it up into chaos, you will get the same results that's happened in Bali. Miracle rice produced miracle pests. The water temples, in short, were simply invisible. They were not seen. So the goal of the World Heritage is to make them visible. Perhaps at this point I should stop. Thank you very much.